How many people here have read or heard of the book Getting to Yes? Right, this book came out 30 years ago. It's widely accepted in many places in the world that win-win is a positive approach when possible for people on different sides to try to reach mutual agreement. So I had the great pleasure of being mentored by Roger Fisher, one of the authors of this book, and hearing a lot of his stories. One of them is that when this book first came out, actually Roger's son was very young. He was just learning to read. And Roger asked him what his favorite book was. So in sort of dutiful child-father relations, he pointed at this book. And his father, we were in Boston, so his father said, is it like Make Way for Ducklings, or and this can't really be your favorite book? And his son said, what could be better than a book called Getting Toys? So I guess sometimes it does work out with kids. That's not mine. But anyway, it's a very well-known book. I'm happy that so many of you have read it. It established a bunch of fundamental principles, and as many of you know, one of them was the idea that in negotiation, you should separate the people from the problem, right? So instead of you and I feeling that we're against each other because we have a conflict, there would be a way that we could step to each other's side, and the two of us together would face the problem out there. And Roger meant this even in situations in armed conflict, not just in simple household debate. He meant even when your armies are engaged in warfare, political leaders shouldn't approach as if they're against each other. They should, by side, focus on the problem together. And that's why this approach is often called joint problem solving, because that was his vision. So I spent a bunch of years traveling, teaching people in many different settings, these principles, including separate the people from the problem. But we often got the same question at the end of a workshop. And it was this one. What about if the people are the problem? And people would say, I think that's a very lovely idea, but actually my husband is my problem. I have a really difficult client, and my client is my problem. My colleague, my direct reports, right? There's a person in my life that I can't communicate with. We have broken trust. We don't have goodwill. I can't separate my problem from this person or this relationship because they feel too interconnected. Does anyone have an example that comes to mind? Right? You feel like, but this relationship and the dynamic, that's the problem I have. So at the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School, I worked with colleagues for about 10 years to assemble what we thought was the best advice to give people when their experience was, the people are my problem. And this book, Difficult Conversations, came out about 10 years ago. And it tries to provide some good, clear behavioral advice when you feel the communication or the relationship is in your way and has to be addressed before you can do any kind of mutual problem solving. I would imagine some of you have read this book. There are also many other wonderful books in the area of communication and relationship. But as I mentioned, I spent a bunch of time working on this, and I share these stories with you because I just want to situate what we'll talk about today in the intellectual lineage that it's coming from. And so this is the context where my work comes in,